Imagine a crowded gathering where the noise of voices merges into a continuous hum and laughter echoes in the air, where each participant seems wholly absorbed in a whirlwind of social interactions. Smiles, handshakes, and lively discussions. This is the essence of human connection, an event where social bonds are strengthened and relationships seem meaningful. Now turn your attention to a solitary figure standing aside. There is no hint of anxiety, awkwardness, or loneliness in their demeanor. On the contrary, they radiate complete indifference to everything happening around them. Immersed in the depths of their own thoughts, they find something more captivating than idle chatter and social niceties. While others are engaged in frivolous jokes, this person remains aloof, showing no interest in trivial conversations and not succumbing to the energy that seems to have gripped the crowd. But why is it so often the case that people with high intelligence seem detached from social life? Is it a manifestation of arrogance, a consequence of introversion, or something much deeper? Is it possible that intelligence itself naturally leads to a preference for solitude? And if this is indeed the case, what are the reasons for such a phenomenon? Today, we will turn our gaze to the profound reflections of Arthur Schopenhauer, a prominent and idiosyncratic thinker of the 19th century. His views on intelligence and social life challenge conventional notions. By the end of this narrative, it will become clear why highly intelligent people often do not see value in social interactions. The final discovery promises to be the most insightful, capable of radically changing the perception of personal relationships. Schopenhauer argued that intelligence and a penchant for solitude are inextricably linked. The higher a person's intellectual level, the less they feel the need for social interactions to gain stimulation or validate their own significance. This is because their minds, by their very nature, are saturated with thoughts, ideas, and internal dialogue, making external distractions superfluous. In his fundamental work, The World as Will and Representation, he explains that the ordinary person seeks company because their mind is empty in solitude, while highly intelligent individuals possess such a rich inner world that solitude becomes a source of enjoyment for them, not longing. A logical question arises: is communication with other people truly a prerequisite for achieving happiness, or is it merely a belief ingrained in our minds from an early age? From childhood, we are taught that having friends, actively participating in social life, and constantly interacting with those around us are integral components of our well-being. We are convinced that people who prefer solitude are missing something important in life. However, the history of mankind suggests otherwise. Many outstanding figures such as Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, Emily Dickinson, Franz Kafka, and even Arthur Schopenhauer himself deliberately avoided bustling society. Were they unhappy, or did they possess an understanding inaccessible to most people? Schopenhauer viewed socialization not as a fundamental human need, but rather as a way to escape oneself for those who do not possess sufficient depth of thought. In his opinion, people who seek constant communication do so because they cannot bear the silence of their own minds. The philosopher believed that most conversations boil down to trivial topics, gossip, and meaningless exchanges of opinions that have no intellectual or personal value. In contrast, according to Schopenhauer, a person with a developed intellect is self-sufficient. They do not need society as a necessity, but choose it selectively, only in those cases when it serves the achievement of higher goals. Now, let's pause for a moment and think. Have you ever felt empty after interacting with other people? Have you ever noticed that while some seem to thrive in society, you, on the contrary, feel exhausted, as if your energy is depleted rather than replenished? If this sounds familiar, know that you are not alone. Many highly intelligent people admit that they feel alienated from conventional social frameworks. And it's not that they don't like people, but that they see through the illusory nature of social necessity. Of course, some may argue that humans are social beings by nature, that in the process of evolution, we have become dependent on groups for survival and emotional well-being. And to some extent, this is true. However, Schopenhauer had his own view on this matter. He believed that while social structures are useful for solving practical problems such as trade, cooperation, and ensuring external security, they do not necessarily lead to inner harmony. Moreover, he argued that excessive communication often distracts from genuine personal growth. Schopenhauer compared people to empty vessels. Those who lack a deep inner world need external stimuli. Conversations, entertainment, recognition from society to feel complete. But those whose inner world is rich do not need such distractions. Their thoughts, ideas, and creativity serve as an inexhaustible source of inspiration for them, turning solitude not just into a desired state, but into a necessary condition for their intellectual and emotional well-being. In modern society, the idea that sociability is an unconditional good has taken root, but this concept raises serious questions. Is the desire for constant communication merely an attempt to escape the discomfort that arises when confronted with one's own thoughts? Arthur Schopenhauer pointed out another problem of social interactions, especially noticeable for people with high intelligence: inevitable conformism. Participating in public life, individuals often engage in monotonous conversations, submit to generally accepted norms, and suppress their individuality for the sake of conformity. Highly intelligent individuals are generally unwilling to compromise themselves. They value authenticity above recognition, depth above superficiality, and truth above politeness. This rejection of conformism leads them to become outcasts who do not fit into the accepted framework. That is why many outstanding thinkers have faced misunderstanding, isolation, and even accusations of having a difficult character or being antisocial. It's not that they despise society, but that they are able to see its illusory nature. They realize that most of what is called communication is just a set of programmed interactions based more on habit than on genuine meaning. However, a legitimate question arises: if outstanding minds are by their nature prone to solitude, does it follow that communication with other people is of no value to them? Or is it possible for them to interact with society in a way that brings them benefit and satisfaction? It is here that Schopenhauer's deep insight comes into play, which will be carefully analyzed further. The final discovery promises to be the most significant. Schopenhauer's reflections question the conventional notions about the value of social life. If people with high intelligence do not feel the need to be constantly surrounded by others, then what is the real basis of their detachment? Is it just a personal choice, or is there a deeper reason why social contacts seem unnecessary and sometimes even tiring to them? To answer this question, it is necessary to turn to another key concept in Schopenhauer's philosophy: the distinction between loneliness and solitude. From his point of view, loneliness is a state that arises from a lack of satisfaction, while solitude is a state of self-sufficiency. Most people fear loneliness because they associate it with emotional emptiness. However, for the outstanding mind, loneliness is not such a painful experience. Schopenhauer argued that solitude is not only beneficial but also necessary for those who strive for wisdom, self-knowledge, and personal growth. Take a moment to pause and reflect on one question. Have you ever been surrounded by people while feeling completely detached from them? Have you ever participated in conversations that seem to be devoid of any meaning? This is precisely the feeling that Arthur Schopenhauer described as the realization that a significant part of social life is built on superficiality rather than on genuine intellectual or emotional connection. In many ways, society teaches us to believe that loneliness is unnatural and that isolation should be avoided at all costs. However, Schopenhauer looked at things differently. He argued that it is solitude that opens the way to the deepest forms of thought and creativity, while constant communication hinders true self-analysis. The philosopher wrote, "He who does not love solitude will not love freedom, for only in solitude is he truly free." This idea has enormous depth. It suggests that the need for constant social interaction is often a kind of addiction, an inability to be alone with one's own thoughts. The wise person, on the other hand, does not fear loneliness but accepts it as a gift, because it grants the freedom to think, create, and understand oneself without outside influence. It's enough to recall the greatest minds in human history. Many of them lived in deliberate isolation, not because they were incapable of communication, but because they found greater satisfaction in solitude. Isaac Newton spent years alone, developing his theories of motion and gravity, which became the cornerstone of modern science. Nikola Tesla, a brilliant inventor, also preferred to remain solitary, dedicating himself entirely to his revolutionary projects. Emily Dickinson, the famous American poet, rarely left her home but created some of the most profound and insightful poems ever written. These outstanding individuals were not lonely in the conventional sense of the word. They were wholly immersed in the richness of their own minds, drawing inspiration and strength for their great achievements. However, there is another, deeper reason why highly intelligent people often keep their distance from noisy social gatherings, and it goes far beyond simply choosing a secluded lifestyle. Arthur Schopenhauer, a perceptive philosopher, noted that in most cases, human interaction is driven not by a sincere exchange of thoughts and ideas, but rather by a complex game of social conventions, inflated egos, and even veiled rivalry. He argued that in a social context, people often seek not to find the truth, but to confirm their own rightness and significance. This phenomenon can be deeply disappointing to those who value intellectual honesty and authenticity above all else. It's worth pondering this, drawing on personal experience. How often in life do you encounter conversations that seem truly important and meaningful? How often do you meet people who show a genuine interest in listening and understanding, rather than simply talking and showcasing themselves? For those with sharp minds and deep thinking, such superficial interactions can seem like nothing more than a useless waste of precious time and energy. They are able to see through the masks that people wear to conform to societal expectations. Notice how people deliberately distort their personalities to fit into social frameworks, avoid serious discussions in favor of meaningless chatter, and seek approval rather than truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, an eminent thinker, held the opinion that intelligence, like a spotlight, illuminates the hidden mechanisms of social interactions. The deeper a person delves into the essence of these mechanisms, the less desire they have to participate in them. Genius minds, according to the philosopher, often face the problem of finding like-minded individuals capable of understanding their depth of thought. This is not due to arrogance, but to a unique mindset, a special vision of the world, inaccessible to most. As a result, they often feel like outsiders in society. But a logical question arises. If social life often boils down to superficial communication, should intellectuals completely isolate themselves from the world? Is there any meaning in human relationships? Schopenhauer offers a subtle nuance. Not all social interactions are meaningless, but only the overwhelming majority of them. The key to solving the problem is selectivity. Intellectually developed people should not avoid society, but they need to carefully choose their circle of acquaintances. It is important to strive for relationships based on genuine intellectual and emotional intimacy, rather than formal social obligations. The philosopher also distinguished between creative solitude and destructive solitude. The former promotes self-development and reflection. The latter is generated by resentment and alienation. Schopenhauer warned against turning intellectual superiority into contempt for others. True wisdom, in his opinion, lies in understanding the nature of society while maintaining a healthy distance. How do intellectuals manage to find the golden mean between solitude and social life? How do they manage to enjoy solitude without breaking away from the world? The key to understanding lies in the insight of Arthur Schopenhauer, who reveals the root cause of intellectuals' indifference to noisy social events and explains what they fill the resulting void with. Schopenhauer's philosophical reflections lead to a striking conclusion, which many thinking people come to independently, consciously, or intuitively. It is not that they disdainfully reject society or are unable to participate in it. Rather, they realize a fundamental truth. At the heart of most human interactions lies not a deep need of the soul, but a banal necessity, an ingrained habit or social programming. This realization radically changes the picture of the world. If most people seek society not out of a desire for genuine intimacy, but out of fear of being alone with themselves, what does this say about the nature of human relationships? Schopenhauer argued that what is commonly called friendship or companionship often stems from mutual need rather than genuine soul connection. This concept is difficult to accept because it challenges a deeply ingrained belief in the unconditional value of relationships. But Schopenhauer makes one wonder, is this really the case? Or are we looking for relationships to avoid meeting ourselves? The philosopher argued that most friendships are like mutually beneficial deals. People are friends not because they are connected by deep feelings, but because of common circumstances, work, study, convenience. But when these circumstances change, the connection weakens. That is why so many friendships dissolve over time. The connection was never based on deep understanding, but was based on external factors that have lost their relevance. Intellectuals notice this pattern and become more discerning in choosing their circle of acquaintances. They do not invest in relationships that lack depth and authenticity. This approach cannot be called cynical. Rather, it is liberating. Having ceased to seek confirmation of one's importance in social life, a person gains the freedom to build relationships based on sincere sympathy and not on a sense of duty to society. Arthur Schopenhauer, a German philosopher, was skeptical of the common belief that the love of others and social success are evidence of keen intellect or mental well-being. He pointed out that the greatest minds of mankind often led a solitary lifestyle, not because of rejection by society, but because of a conscious choice of a different path. A prime example is Leonardo da Vinci, whose deep introspection and preference for solitary work over social entertainment are well known. His mind was entirely absorbed in scientific research, innovative inventions, and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. And he viewed communication with people as an obstacle to his high goals. Nikola Tesla held similar views, stating that he would never marry so that personal relationships would not distract him from scientific activities. These outstanding personalities were not burdened by loneliness. Their thoughts were occupied with issues that transcended worldly communication. But what is the true object of aspiration for intellectuals, if not public recognition? The answer lies in the concept of wisdom, which Schopenhauer placed above all else. He argued that the highest form of existence is the relentless pursuit of knowledge and self-improvement. For people prone to deep reflection, time spent in contemplation is much more valuable than idle talk. They are not attracted by popularity or dominance in society. They strive to comprehend the deep essence of reality. Schopenhauer's philosophy takes on an even more radical hue when he argues that true wisdom requires detachment, not only from secular life, but also from the illusions by which most people live. In his opinion, the man in the street is mired in an endless series of entertainments, a race for prestige and approval without even thinking about the meaning of what is happening. At the same time, intellectuals instinctively distance themselves from these things because they see their transience and meaninglessness. In modern society, where social interactions play a key role, people often try to present themselves in a favorable light. They carefully shape their image, controlling their words and actions to conform to accepted norms. There is a hidden pressure to meet expectations, appear pleasant, and maintain a certain image, while avoiding anything that might disrupt this harmony. However, for those who are able to see this game, participating in it may seem tiring and pointless. Schopenhauer called this state the burden of clarity. The deeper the understanding of the world, the more difficult it is to come to terms with illusions and pretense. This does not mean that intellectuals completely avoid social contact. Rather, they approach it from a different point of view. They do not depend on public opinion and do not define their personality through social interactions. They see them as a tool that can be useful in certain situations, but is not necessary to achieve deep satisfaction. That is why many intellectuals prefer small, meaningful conversations to noisy parties. They gravitate towards communication with those who are able to give them an intellectual challenge, and not just provide company. They seek depth and meaning, not superficial communication. This is the greatest paradox of human existence. Gifted minds, often distancing themselves from worldly bustle, have a unique ability to comprehend the deep aspects of human nature. Their conscious solitude is not an escape from society, but rather a desire for a clearer and more objective understanding of its essence. Arthur Schopenhauer, the German irrationalist philosopher, asserted that wisdom springs from observing life from the sidelines, rather than fully immersing oneself in it. Only by detaching from universal involvement can one see the bigger picture and assess the scale of events. This idea contradicts conventional notions of the importance of social activity. If deep reflection naturally leads to solitude, then perhaps the true criterion of intelligence is not success in society, but the ability to remain alone without feeling inadequate. This concept is difficult for modern society to grasp, as it clashes with the belief that social connections are the highest form of satisfaction. However, Schopenhauer makes us wonder, is this really the case? Or have we been conditioned to believe this because loneliness makes most people uncomfortable? Perhaps the truth lies in the fact that the capacity for self-sufficiency and deep self-analysis is a sign of a mature and developed personality that does not need constant approval and validation from others. As we approach the culmination of understanding Schopenhauer's philosophy, a key question arises: what is the highest value for intellectuals who do not seek social recognition? And how can this understanding transform our personal existence? This final revelation promises to be the most profound. If outstanding minds do not strive for social activity, what fills their lives with meaning, if not approval, friendship, or confirmation from those around them? Schopenhauer's final insight is both strikingly profound and disturbing. True satisfaction, in his view, stems not from external sources but from the inner world of the individual. He argued that those who seek happiness in social interaction often pursue an elusive illusion, while those who cultivate depth, knowledge, and strive for self-improvement find something far more lasting. At the heart of his philosophical views lies the idea that human suffering is caused by insatiable desires, an endless thirst for recognition, pleasures, and entertainment. Most people, he observed, spend their days in a state of continuous pursuit of something. They strive for relationships, high social status, and entertainment, naively believing that this will bring them long-awaited happiness. However, even after achieving what they desire, they experience only fleeting satisfaction. Soon a new thirst arises, and this endless cycle begins again. Intellectually developed individuals possess a unique ability to discern the deceptive nature of conventional notions of success and happiness. They realize that genuine satisfaction lies not in the approval of others, but in harmony with their own life mission and a deepened understanding of the world. This is why they often avoid superficial social contacts, not out of contempt for others, but out of a reluctance to waste time on empty amusements that distract from true goals. Such awareness can turn life upside down, making one think about the falsity of instilled ideals. What if happiness lies not in a crowd of admirers, but in the development of one's own inner world? Arthur Schopenhauer argued that wise people are not afraid of loneliness because they have learned to find harmony with themselves. Instead of chasing external stimuli, they enrich their inner world with reading, reflection, and creativity, striving for knowledge not for the sake of public recognition, but for the sake of self-development. Schopenhauer wrote that the less developed a person's intellect, the simpler and more understandable the world seems to him. In other words, deeply thinking and self-analyzing people do not perceive life superficially. They ask questions, analyze, and seek meaning, which often leads to a feeling of. In circles of society oriented towards conventional values and avoiding serious philosophical reflection, Arthur Schopenhauer puts forward an especially weighty argument in favor of solitude. Loneliness appears not simply as a personal choice, but as a necessary condition for those who seek to comprehend true wisdom. The philosopher warned that immersion in social noise can become a serious obstacle to the development of independent thinking. The expectations of others, the persistent desire to conform to accepted norms, the endless stream of distractions, all this leads a person away from the most important journey that can be made, the journey into oneself. That is why Schopenhauer regarded loneliness not as mere isolation, but as a kind of liberation. He believed that the outstanding minds of the past reached the heights of their potential not through active participation in public life, but on the contrary, through withdrawal from it. By distancing themselves from everyday worries and worldly bustle, they gained the ability to see the surrounding reality more clearly and devote themselves to higher aspirations. This perspective challenges modern notions of social life, where we are constantly urged to connect, build relationships, and avoid loneliness at all costs. However, Schopenhauer makes us wonder, is all this really necessary, or have we simply been conditioned to think so? After all, modern society is essentially afraid of being alone. The history of mankind shows that many outstanding minds, creators and innovators, preferred to stay away from generally accepted norms and entertainment. Their minds were entirely absorbed in great ideas, painstaking work, and the relentless search for meaning in life. But should we conclude from this that social connections are completely useless? Arthur Schopenhauer, the famous German philosopher, was not so categorical. He acknowledged that relationships between people can be valuable, but only when they are based on deep intellectual or emotional understanding. Schopenhauer warned against seeking to surround oneself with people simply to avoid loneliness. He argued that if one has to choose between superficial communication and solitude, the latter is always preferable. The philosopher urged not to waste time on empty talk and meaningless entertainment, but to devote oneself to self-development and understanding the world. So what should we do? Is it necessary to completely abandon social life? Not at all. However, Schopenhauer's ideas suggest radically changing one's approach to this issue. Instead of seeking satisfaction in other people, one should first find it in oneself. Instead of fearing loneliness, one should embrace it as a valuable tool for personal growth and self-discovery. Instead of chasing the approval of others, one should strive for knowledge, wisdom, and self-improvement. Geniuses and social life. Why outstanding minds choose solitude. Among the intellectual elite, there is an opinion that social connections are not a priority. This is not due to alienation or inability to communicate, but rather to a conscious choice in favor of deeper and more meaningful activities. Geniuses, as a rule, have a unique ability to independent thinking, creativity, and self-sufficiency, which allows them to find satisfaction within themselves and not in the constant search for external approval. Instead of spending time and energy on maintaining a wide circle of acquaintances, these people focus on developing their inner world. They draw inspiration from books, scientific research, art, and self-analysis, finding much greater satisfaction in these activities than in social conversations or parties. In this regard, the question arises, what will happen if each of us accepts loneliness not as a disadvantage, but as a source of strength? What if we stop looking for confirmation of our worth in the eyes of others and direct our energy to self-improvement? What horizons will open up before us if we free ourselves from the fetters of public opinion and begin to think independently? History knows many examples when great minds, neglecting social norms, made revolutionary discoveries and created immortal works of art. Perhaps their ostracism was not a manifestation of weakness, but rather foresight, an ability to see beyond generally accepted frameworks. And it is quite likely that the path of self-knowledge, independence, and intellectual freedom is the key to achieving genuine happiness and self-realization.